Good morning, everyone. I'm Reverend Bonnie, the community spiritual leader here at the center, and it is March 1st, everyone. Happy March, happy leap year weekend. Anybody go to a Sadie Hawkins dance? Remember those days? Yeah. So, I am the person that gets to be blessed with being your community spiritual leader, and that was reinforced at this conference that we were at. And so I will be sharing with you some of the tidbits from that, along with what we are focused on this month, which is honoring the divine feminine within us all. So I would like to begin by asking you to take a moment just to go within. If you want to close your eyes, you can, or you can just focus inwardly. I'm going to read a list of words, and I'd like you to consider how they make you feel, and if they fall for you under a category that you would call feminine or masculine. Purposefulness, receptive, volition or choice, unchoosing, heaven, only doing, darkness, power and action, light, power and will, receiving, penetrating, activity, rest, recovery, giving, absorption. And so now bring your awareness back into this room. And you might wonder why I chose those words. They're actually a mix of words, some taken from the back of the Science of Mind text written by Ernest Holmes, and his symbol, the Universal Metaphysical Chart number 1, where he's divided our metaphysical chart into the 3 layers that are part of our symbol here. And he's talking about the top layer being self-conscious, where masculine falls, the middle being subconscious, where he puts feminine, and the bottom being the union of the two, which creates form or matter. And it's also words taken from the meaning of the yin-yang symbol, which I think most of you are familiar with, but I tried to draw it for you so you'd have that as a reminder. And the yin-yang symbol also attributes certain attributes to the feminine or female and certain to male. What these two circles have in common, because notice this is in a circle and Holmes's is in a circle, is that they both see all of these attributes as part of the whole. They are inseparable, and there is no judgment about them. There's not any group that's better than another. They are all required to be part of manifestation, part of what we know in life. So you'll notice I didn't say good or bad. Those are not part of the words that are in these different symbols. There is no judgment. And I thought about it kind of like a nut and a bolt. I know that sometimes they're referred to as the female part and the male part. Well, you can't hold anything together with a nut or a bolt. You need both of them to hold something together. And that's how these concepts work. Together, they create the wholeness. And so why then are we spending an entire month focused on the divine feminine? Will we have a whole month on the divine masculine? Well, I was originally attracted to religious science because at the time, I found this to be one of the more inclusive teachings in our modern time, where Ernest Holmes clearly was aware of the balance between the two. And yet I noted last month, we included another chapter. We included chapter 20 as we were introducing the teachings of Science of Mind. And in chapter 20, it was called What the Mystics Taught. And Ernest Holmes lists in that chapter, he refers to them as a group of poets and mystics. And that entire list was all male. And it struck me because Ernest Holmes studied with a female mystic, Emma Curtis Hopkins. And she studied under another person we could consider a female mystic, Mary Baker Eddy, who founded Christian Science. And they are not the only two female mystics in the world or poets that could have been listed in that list. So what I realized is that even Ernest Holmes was influenced by that race consciousness that used mostly male examples, saw them as more visible or recognizable, and possibly even as more respected. I don't know what his thinking was, or if he even noticed that that whole list was all male. In Care of the Soul, one of the books we read in our practitioner training, Thomas More says near the end of his book that one of the things that happens in our schools when funding gets lowered, when there's less funding for the schools, the first things that get cut are what? You all are here. Dance, the arts, even PE. And Thomas More said those are the things that feed our soul. They are so important for our children and for us. And so the idea is that those are the things that are more feminine and they are cuttable. They are do-awayable. So why is that? Why is it when we need both things in our lives to create that greater whole and that balance? So this month, the focus on the divine feminine is taking place. It's part of our Science of Mind magazine, and it's taking place around this country as a way to recognize a shift in race consciousness, as a way to feed and recognize that what feeds our soul, what is considered the more feminine, is also valuable and important for that balance. And to recognize that there are women mystics, teachers, and leaders, not only in this movement, but all around the world. And it's to bring about a more complete whole. It's not to make one greater than the other. It's to bring about that balance, like in the yin and yang symbol, so that we have in, through, and around us, every one of us, that balance. In the magazine, there's an article by Dr. Dennis Merritt Jones, and I just want to note we have a lineup of amazing people coming, and he's one of them. He will be here May 30th and 31st to do a workshop and then speak. And in his article, he titled it, "What Sex is Your God?" Yeah, think about that. He recalled taking a class, a world religion class in college, and he said the professor started the class by asking that question. And of course, a great debate and discussion ensued. And then the instructor said, is it possible that God could be genderless or androgynous while at the same time being both masculine and or feminine? After a long pause, he then said, and it is up to you individually to determine how you relate to it. Masculine, feminine, neither or both. And he says, there it was, that operative word, it. And one of the things I know about the teachings of Ernest Holmes, he often goes back and uses that term, it. And I've had people ask me when they're new to this teaching, it, when we're referring to God, that's a new concept. To remove either gender from how God is referred to. And so for some, that's a challenge to get over as they become part of this teaching. So as I was spending the hours I spent researching, I spend way too much time because I get so excited about these topics. I went back to Mary Baker Eddy, since she's sort of at the top of our family tree of the New Thought movement. And this is her Science and Health, with Key to the Scriptures. It's one of her main texts. Now this, mind you, was written in 1903, 117 years ago. She's talking about the book of Genesis. And so the first part is from the book of Genesis. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Now these are her words. To emphasize this momentous thought, it is repeated that God made man in his own image to reflect the divine spirit. It follows that man is a generic term. Masculine, feminine, and neuter genders are human concepts. I thought that was a new idea in the most recent few years. She said this 117 years ago. In one of the ancient languages, the word for man is used also as the synonym of mind. This definition has been weakened by anthropomorphism, or a humanization of deity with a capital D. The word anthropomorphic is such a phrase as an anthropomorphic God is derived from two Greek words signifying man and form, and may be defined as a mortally mental attempt to reduce deity to corporality. In other words, to put a body on deity. The life-giving quality of mind is spirit, not matter. The ideal man corresponds to creation, to intelligence, and to truth. The ideal woman corresponds to life and to love. Great song, Mary Lynn. In divine science, we have not as much authority for considering God masculine as we have for considering him feminine, for love imparts the clearest idea of deity. 117 years ago. That's what Mary Baker Eddy said. She then goes on to talk about what was in the reading this morning, that God has countless ideas, and they all have one principle and parentage. It all comes from the one. So despite these roots of our teaching having that strong idea about the divine feminine and masculine and them being in balance and all coming from the one, I think often some of that gets lost in the general race consciousness that we have out in the world. And we need to remember it. Therefore, we are focusing this month on bringing that divine feminine forward to help create a greater balance. So at the conference, one of the things that happens during the business meeting is they open the mics for people in the audience to come forward and ask questions of our executive director. And one of the questions that was brought up is, what is being done? Is anyone focusing on the language in our main textbooks so that it can be more gender neutral or gender inclusive? So that it can be more accessible to the next generations of kids, youth, who are used to seeing a more gender-inclusive language when they read nowadays. So that was a question, and they're looking at this. Now, I imagine there might be a few, maybe not, who are thinking, does it really matter? Do we really have to be so politically correct? Aren't there better things to spend our time and money on? So I want to share with you something that our new community spiritual leader said, and his name is Dr. Reverend Edward Viljoen. He said, if something annoys you, it's for you. Yeah, that's what his look was on many of us. If something annoys you, it's for you. If it upsets you or offends you, it's an invitation to look within at what can be healed. What annoys is here to help us heal and to reveal more of our truth. So in this little one topic, people on either side have room for healing. If we are annoyed because the language isn't gender inclusive enough, there's room for healing. If we're annoyed at those who are trying to make it more gender inclusive, there's room for healing. What annoys you is for you. And my thought is always to go back to what it is we teach. What do we teach? We teach that our thoughts, the words in our thoughts, the words that we use have power. Words are important. Words influence how we feel. Think back to the words that I read at the beginning of the service. Did they bring up different feelings? Not good or bad, but just different experiences and different feelings. Words are instrumental in creating our world. It's with words that we set our intentions and create through spiritual mind treatment, through prayer, what it is that we experience in our world. So it makes sense to me that if we want a more balanced experience, that our language becomes balanced, because that expresses our true nature. There are other ways that we hear words, and Ernest Holmes has encouraged us to think about these words. Today we hear about a war on drugs, battling a virus, fighting for our rights. How do those words compare to words like transformation, conversion, evolution, and collaboration? In Living the Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes, there's a very small chapter called Treatment for the Sensitive Person. Isn't that sweet? That's on page 334 if you want to find it. In here he says, fear is a positive acceptance that we shall experience that which we dislike. Faith is a positive acceptance that we shall experience that which we do like. We should not fight fear, but we should convert fear into faith. The energy of fear converted into faith will produce an opposite effect. So again, as we know, what we resist persists, and fighting is resisting. So we're converting, we're shifting, we're changing, we're surrounding with that balance and that love. Just breathe that in for a moment. So, Ernest Holmes, I think, brought a different perspective to how we look at things in the words that we use. He brought a realization of the importance of the words that we use. And so it reminded me of a story, and I looked really hard to find where I had read it. I think it was in a magazine I'd been reading this month. And the story was being written by a man, and he was describing his experience of going through the pregnancy of his wife and then the birth of his first child. And as he's describing all of this, we get along to after the birth, and he goes to pick up his newborn, and he said, "It looked like a battleground. There was blood everywhere." And that kind of struck me. I thought, wow, the use of the word battleground when we're talking about new life. And I realized even just that concept, we can look at blood as that which is violent and bringing about death, or we can see it as that which brings about birth and new life. We talk about life blood. So right there, seeing the balance, both are realities and part of our life experience. And as a woman is laboring, yes, there's pain, discomfort. I would imagine I never was blessed with the experience, but we call it labor, so there's work involved. And what I know is that during that process, there's a singleness of focus. There's a singleness of purpose. Everything else falls away, and the focus is on bringing new life into this world. And so that leads me back to the conference. And some of the main takeaways that I got from the various speakers, and we heard a lot of really good speakers. Many of them spoke to the fact that we are past the fork in the road. At one time, our movement split into two, Religious Science International and United Church of Religious Science. And in the last several years, we've pulled those back together under the umbrella of Centers for Spiritual Living. That took a lot of work. It was a vision that was birthed. It caused some pain, it caused some discomfort, but we've come back together. So the message was, now we are here, a unified force with a singleness of purpose, and we are birthing or midwifing our collective vision, which is a world that works for everyone. We've come together with that singleness of purpose. And so what you may not know, so I'm just sharing a little bit about our organization here, is that when the two groups came back together, they created 3 leadership positions. I see it as kind of like 3 legs on a stool holding up the foundation of who we are as a movement. The one leadership position is our field leader, who's Reverend Sharon Hudson. And some of you might remember her because she was involved with our board when I was new, when I was still an interim minister here. And she was instrumental in getting Home Office to allow me to stay on as your permanent minister. So we love Sharon Hudson. The other position, a second position, is the executive director position. And we recently got a new executive director, Sonia Barney, B-Y-R-N-E. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. But she has worked all over the world in leadership positions, including in the Middle East, North Africa area. Our third position is the community spiritual leader. And during the conference, we took the vote on who would be our next community spiritual leader. And there were several contestants, so we heard from all of the people running for that position, in addition to then finding out on Wednesday night who was our new leader. Our new leader replaced Reverend Dr. Ken Gordon. Many of you might be familiar with him. And our new leader is Reverend Dr. Edward Viljoen. He originally is from South Africa, and he has, over the last several years, been the community spiritual leader in Santa Rosa, California. So we heard from many of these people in addition to a lot more, and we heard from some of these leaders twice. Their main theme, I think, for me at least, and my main takeaway from it, was how do we apply the principles of science of mind in our real life situations? And during challenging times, whether it's personal challenge, whether it's a communal challenge, how do we move into principle and stay there during all of our experiences? Reverend Sonia was living in Cairo, Egypt in 2011 when the revolution happened. And she shared a very dramatic story about being in her office when she was told by an assistant, "We need to get out of the city now." They got piled into 6 cars and started driving out of the city when mayhem was taking place outside, and eventually saw a barrier in front of them. So they all pulled over and got out, and they were looking to her for leadership and for guidance. And she realized there was no going back. So this is what came to her as she centered in. She said, "We are going to get in our cars. We're going to drive straight ahead, aiming for that bridge that will take us out of the city and across to a safe place. We are going to drive 60 miles an hour, and we will not look at what's going on either side of us." She said, "No rubbernecking. Get your focus there. We're going to drive, and we'll meet up on the other side." Now, of course, they had no idea what they were going to run into and if they would make it through. Obviously, she was standing there. They made it through. She said people kind of parted the way thinking they must know where they're going, and they let them across. She said when they got to the other side, they broke some of the traditions. I guess men and women in that country don't hug. They piled out of the cars and they were all hugging each other. It didn't matter, male or female at that time. They were so grateful to be across. And she likened that experience to what we are experiencing now. She said there's no going back. That we need to be willing to go forward even if we don't know what it looks like or what we're going to run into. That we need to keep our focus on where we are going, our vision, that vision of a world that works for everyone. We keep our focus on the vision and we don't get distracted by all the craziness that we might be driving through. No rubbernecking. She said also, her third point was, don't ask someone to do something you aren't willing to do yourself. She was one of the drive-away car drivers. And she said, celebrate your victories. She concluded another one of her talks with a quote from Ernest Holmes. "There is a divine awareness within you which will lead you upward and onward." And then we heard from another woman, Reverend Stephanie St. Ahmed, Steph. She goes by Steph, I'm sorry. And she started with a quote, "Travelers, there is no path. The path is forged as you go." And I discovered that Rumi said something similar to that as well, that the path is revealed as we walk on it. So it's not that we can actually see clearly sometimes where we're headed, but that path is revealed as we move forward. And she said our roadmap is spiritual mind treatment or prayer. She said the important things are connection, collaboration, and celebration again. It's key as we awaken humanity to its spiritual magnificence. And of course, I am condensing a 20 or 30-minute talk into 2 minutes here. She concluded with, "I alone can do this, but I cannot do it alone." And then she said, "Follow me, I'll be right by your side." I thought that was beautiful. So Wednesday came. We got a lot of snow. That was the one day it snowed, and that was the day the entire conference was going to be piling into buses and going to Mile High for their Wednesday night service. And at the end of the service, we were going to hear who our new community spiritual leader was. The service was fabulous. If you ever get to Mile High, that's where Barbara hails from. It is an amazing energy, the music, the interpreter was fabulous. It was just all great. At the end, they announced that our new community spiritual leader is Reverend Dr. Edward Viljoen, and they kind of looked around. I think everybody was looking around, and he didn't show up. So, service moved on. We piled in the buses, and we went back to the hotel. Well, the next day was the last day, and he was the last speaker to tie up the entire conference. And he did speak to us. He was there, and he shared from his heart in a way that was just so touching and moving, I think, for everyone. Because Wednesday night, he had been resting in his hotel room, and his husband went out to get dinner for them. And while he was relaxing, he gets a text from his husband that says, "I've been in an accident, come now." He said he got dressed, ran down to the corner, and he's very humorous in addition to the seriousness of his message. He gets to the corner and he said, "I realized it probably wouldn't be wise for me to run into traffic to try and get over there to the ambulance to see how he was doing." So he's standing on the street corner with all that fear and anxiety, and he realized at that moment it didn't matter what was going on at the conference, who became the community spiritual leader. His focus was on getting to his partner to make sure he was okay. And so he went to that place that he holds on to in his heart, the teachings of Science of Mind, and he started saying, there is one life. That life is God's life. That life is my life. That life is my husband's life now. And that brought him into center. He had another one, and I didn't write it down. I was so absorbed in his talk that I didn't catch what the second one was that he said. Eventually, the traffic stopped. He got to his husband. Everything was eventually okay, but they'd had quite a shock and obviously did not end up at the service that night. But what I took away from his talk was he was saying to us, I am your community spiritual leader, and I still went to that place of panic and fear. And I had to hold on to the truth of these teachings so that I didn't run into traffic and do something stupid, so that I could get to my husband and get, sure that everything was okay. And so I started looking at, what do I hold on to? What phrases, what prayers, what teachings do we hold on to, do you cling to in the midst of trauma and experiences? I know, Pat, you've been through that, Nancy and Pam, Karen, all of us who are healing. What do we hold on to in those moments? What do we cling to? And then he said, we can all transcend our shortcomings by acknowledging them and continuing to keep going. That wasn't going to stop him from being an amazing community spiritual leader. He said, even when terrified, we must take the next step. So as we continue into 2020 and beyond, as we move forward into this year, as we continue to birth this world that we know is working for everyone. We see it already. We keep that singleness of purpose. I started to see it like the baby kicking in the womb. It's already alive. It's already so in the mind of God. We need to keep that singular focus. And it might get messy. It might be laborious. There might be painful moments. We don't know what's ahead. And I realize that we need to have those truths to hang on to. We might need to do our breathing, and I realized too, I thought this was funny, it came to me. We need to know when to push, and we know when to pant and not push. Does that sound familiar to some people? In other words, we need to know when to take action and when there is time for non-action. Again, that yin and yang, that balance of action and non-action, working together for the end result that we are seeking. We keep our focus on where we're going, no rubbernecking, and we keep moving forward. The divine feminine calls us to conceive. Now think about that. Ernest Holmes says we can't have something if we don't have the mental equivalent. We say, I can't conceive it, or I can conceive of it. The divine feminine calls us to conceive, to create, to birth, and then to nurture and raise that which has been birthed. And so I want to note that traditionally that's all been called women's work. But now, in this time, this work is the divine feminine being done through all of us, bringing that greater balance into our experience. So this month we have an amazing lineup of the divine feminines that are going to be speaking to you. Next week is Reverend Cynthia James. And I was thinking about her, and I realized as I look back over the last 15 years of my life, this woman has been instrumental in every one of my most important and essential decisions and experiences that I've had. She was my mentor for the 6 months prior to me being ordained, and she was there and part of my thought processes as I made some major decisions over the last several years. So you don't want to miss her. She's amazing. And talk to some of the folks that have seen her. Nancy's and Pam are nodding their heads. Kathy, those of us who have experienced her, don't miss her. Her workshop will be fabulous. One of the things I realized is that part of what I was learning through her workshops was to choose me. And as I chose more of me, I became a better community spiritual leader for all of you. Her workshop is called I Choose Me. And then after that is our own Lillian Pilot, and then I'm speaking again because I couldn't get it all in 1 week. And then after that is one of our new members of our community, Reverend Amari Magdalena, and she is teaching a class right now here, and she says you can still jump into her class. And we will wrap up the month with a ministerial student from the Rio Grande Center in Albuquerque, Kamatara. When she was here before, people loved her talk. She's full of energy. So, hopefully, this month, as we honor that divine feminine within us all, I hope you all get a really good dose of yin for your yang that will create a greater balance in you so that that truth of the wholeness of who you are is expressed in even greater ways. And so it is. Thank you.